Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to Maps of Becoming, the Eudaimonia Podcast. Today, we are going to dive into a real life fairy tale with one of my dear, dear friends, Kim Morrison. Kim, welcome, and thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, it's such a pleasure, as always, you angel. You just do the most incredible work, and I love the topics that you dive into.
Oh, I'm so excited. I'm excited. So what we're going to do today is really this is capturing your story, and the listeners will start to hear the rhythm. There may be some that are joining us for the first time, but there's this rhythm of rupture, retreat, and return and rise that mirrors the seasons in nature around us, and in every fairy tale that we read. So what I want to do, I feel like the place to begin your story is somewhere around 9. I know that was the first major rupture in your life. So whether you want to start a little bit before and set the scene, or yeah, just wherever feels the right place to start.
Thank you, sweetheart. Yeah, my mum had me very young. She was 17. I was in her belly when her and Dad got married, and I wouldn't say their marriage was one of love, probably more one of you know standing by a mistake potentially. Maybe I was a mistake. But I remember my mother saying I was also an escape for her. So that was an interesting thing, whether I picked up on that unconsciously, because my dear mum had been abused by her own father, not sexually, but physically and emotionally. And her beautiful mother both, had to hide the scars, the bruises, and it was very challenging for my mother. And my grandfather, I don't remember much about him except that I remember being scared of him, and he seemed like this grumpy old man. And I remember his mother was there as well. Her name was Gran, and she was scary. She literally did look like a witch. She had the mole with the hairs coming out, and I was half expecting her to hold a forbidden apple or something, but she was scary too. And so I remember those early memories with mum and dad together. I don't remember a lot of happiness. I don't recall, lots of love, but then I had no comparison. So I don't remember at that age thinking too much, except my sister came along when I was 3.5, and my brother came along when I was 6.5. And I just took on the role of wanting to love and nurture and support and help them, and probably unconsciously became my mother's right-hand person. And during those early years, mum and dad did buy a milk bar, or a dairy, it was called over there in New Zealand. And I remember living in the house across the road, and right next door to that dairy milk bar was a butcher. There was also a chemist and a newsagent in this block of shops. And I remember mum and dad would make lunches for the quarry that was up the road. And so they'd send me next door to the butcher shop to get the meat and the ham and the luncheon sausage and all of those things. And I hated going there, because the man that ran the butcher shop would shut the door and lock it, and then would lead me out the back through all these buckets of tongues and carcasses and brains and blood. And I just know the smell and could remember it. And, sadly, he abused me. And really, I remember being very afraid, but he also threatened to cut my hand off with one of the big butcher knives if I told anybody our secret. And ironically, and I can't remember the linear timing of this, but I remember we also had a 16-year-old babysitter, a boy babysitter, and he abused me that night mum and dad were out. And then when my nana sadly died when I was 9, her partner, it wasn't my grandfather, it was her partner, he also abused me. And I can't remember how many times that happened, but I do remember thinking, this is all so wrong, so wrong. And so I guess for me, those early years, it's funny though, as much as I share this and it sounds horrific, and it was horrific for a little girl to have to experience and endure all of that, I do recall having this very bright disposition and always believed in love and rainbows and unicorns and fairies, and just always believed there would always be something good. And I remember in the middle of the night, one night, Mum coming into my room. I don't know the time. I felt like it was midnight, but I remember her waking me and saying, Kim, wake up, we're leaving your father. And I remember this orange plastic clothes basket and putting all our clothes and getting my sister and brother's things into there. And we climbed into a car and we went to a hotel. And that was the beginning of having a single mother. And it was all in that year of 9. So it was a very big, lots of ruptures, I guess, and lots of, I guess the beautiful thing about being a young girl is there wasn't a lot of headspace for questioning why me or how come or victim mentality or self-sabotage. I didn't know any of that. I just wanted to play and I wanted to be with my girlfriends and ride our pretend horses and roller skate and wear headbands and go on pat horses. So, it was just, there was this incredible, beautiful innocence and quite a horrific other side to it, really, which was quite challenging.
Yeah. As I hear that, I feel like it's an extraordinary thing, and it's, we come as a mother of 4 children. I know that my 4 children all raised with exactly the same everything in their environment, essentially in their younger years, have got 4 radically different personalities. I've got 1 extrovert, 3 introverts, but the difference in them, and it makes me think about, children that have experiences like this. There's something in the DNA, something in you that I guess you bring from ancestry, or, that allowed you to still be a bubbly child despite that. Not every child is, and it's not necessarily something it doesn't sound like it was something that somebody necessarily supported you through or counseled you through, or it's just in you. It's part of who you are.
Yeah, and I think when I look back on it and I sit here and I try to kind of make meaning of a 9-year-old girl's life as an adult, and it's quite interesting because you have this perception as an adult of, the horrificness and the sadness and the cruelty and the hardship and how hard it was for Mum when she found out and all of those things. But when I put myself not disassociated from it and not looking at it as the observer, I don't recall, unless I really remember and sit there and think about all the things that those men did, do I get really upset about it. Now, that could be because my dear Mum, who was so strong and such a capable, independent woman, I mean, she had me at 16, 17, and Dad was only 20, and I remember him constantly saying he never wanted children and children were a pain in the butt and go and play on the motorway, and he used to say these things which I'm sure were kind of throwaway funny lines, but looking back maybe they weren't. But again, just used to think that was funny. But I think what happened, being the oldest, I think, there was something that made me step up and into being Mum's right-hand person, and she needed help. And sadly, her leaving Dad in the 70s like she did, I didn't know this, but she felt very ostracized from the community because it just wasn't done. So you can imagine, my mother was 26 with 3 children. Her mother just passed away, and she's dealing with all of this with me. She's left my dad. She's trying to provide because Dad didn't help really much at all. And I think when I look back at it, I think we were just in survival mode. So potentially we didn't have time to dwell or things like that. But when Mum found out about the butcher, it was interesting how she was confronted with it, because he started trying to, I guess, try it on with my sister. Now, my sister has a very strong, bold voice and speaks her mind very easily, whereas I was probably more of the goody two-shoes, keep the peace, make everyone happy. My sister was like, when something has to be said, it has to be said. And at 6, she told Mum what Ron had been doing, or had tried to do, I guess, and Mum just thought, what 6-year-old makes this crap up? And then, of course, she then figured, well, if he's doing it to her, what the hell's he been doing with Kim? So that was, I asked her just recently how she processed all of that, and it was such a shock. She knew something was up, but she had no idea what it was. So I must have been portraying something. Anyway, when she confronted me about it, I'd been roller skating with a girlfriend in her driveway and was asked to go home, and I didn't want to go home. I must have had a feeling or an intuition at that age that something was coming. And of course, when I finally admitted to it, because I didn't want to get my hand chopped off either, we went straight to the police. Now, as an adult, when I look back on that time, I have this version that the police were wonderful. They were really helpful, being in a small room and having to process this. But my dear mum, recently, or a couple of years ago, I was asked to speak at a book launch called Dangerous Animals in the Home about a woman who was abused by her father. And I was one of the keynote speakers. And as I was driving out to Toowoomba to do this, I rang mum. And for the first time in our whole lives, I said to her, what actually happened? And then I said to her, the police were really nice, weren't they? She said, Kim, they were terrible. They did not believe you. And then I said, what about that little room we were in? She goes, Kim, it wasn't little. It was very open plan. And I kept trying to stop them from asking you these hideous questions in front of all these people. So I look back on it, I think maybe my mum was sitting really close trying to protect me. And being a little 9-year-old, I would have felt like potentially she was like this wall, this guardian. So it was, again, that interesting perception or perspective that we have. Finally, of course, the police believed us because there was no way I could make up what was happening. And then I asked my mum and I said to her, he used to take me, didn't he used to take me to the Easter show or something? And mum said no. And this was really fascinating. She said, no, Kim, him and his wife June would take you to cat shows. And the minute she said that, Edwina, all these memories came to me of going to cat shows and seeing cats in cages and petting cats. And I'd obviously blocked this whole part of my world. But the minute mum said cat shows, I just had this plethora of memories hit my inbox, so to speak. And then I said to her, how did you let him take me? Like who would ever let an old man, and he was in his 60s, take me to an Easter show? And she said, oh, he's very clever. He'd bring his wife, he'd pick you up and say, we're going to the cat show. We'd go to the cat show, and then he'd say to his wife, oh, I've got to get Kim home. But instead of taking me home, he'd take me back to his place. And then, of course, would continue the abuse and then would drop me home and remember our little secret. I do remember those kind of words. And so mum had no idea. June had no idea. No one had any idea. And it was quite clever when you think about it. So, yeah, my mother was just mortified, as you would be as a mother, to think that we do all we can to protect our children, and there's still these monsters out there that disrupt us and rupture our worlds, literally.
Yeah. Yeah, it's terrifying. And when you hear these, I mean, I was a single mother with 4 children, and I think about there were a few people that offered to do things with my kids, and it was just such a help to have a break occasionally, or other people to step in. And to my knowing, everyone was fabulous, but it's I can imagine as a single mother that she was grateful for the opportunity if somebody stepped in to help. Oh my goodness. So your teenage years, from 9, so through to sort of 18, 21, were you still in New Zealand at this stage?
Yes. We were in New Zealand till my late 30s. So, yeah, I mean, look, I loved school, I loved sport. I mean, my sister and brother joke and call me the Miss Goody Two Shoes, straighty 180. Like I was very, I wouldn't say I was top of the class or I wasn't highly academic, but I was highly sporty.
Yeah.
And the grades, I was always in the 70s, sometimes 80s. So I was an average, above average student, house captain, netball captain. So, just found it was a beautiful, I don't know if the word was escape back then because you had to go anyway, but it was school was and when I look back on my schooling, we were at a very rough school too. Like there was a lot of tough kids there, and a lot of Maori and Pacific Island, low socioeconomic. The people behind us, there was always violence going on around there, and alcohol and drugs, and so when I think back to it, I'm just like, yeah, it's amazing. We all got through pretty unscathed, really. But
Yeah.
I guess sport was my savior through my teens, and school, wanting to step up and do the best I could. And mum always said, obviously having me at such a young age, her whole thing was always travel and see the world before you have children. Make sure you
Yeah.
do what you need to do for you first. And so I never imagined having children until I was 30. And when I look at my diaries back when I was a teenager, and I used to write in a diary every day,
Mm.
and a lot of it's coded. So, and I don't know my code anymore. So I don't even know what I'm saying in some of it. So it's really cute.
Oh,
So there was these symbols and things, and I didn't have a code thing anywhere, but it was so that if anyone ever looked at my diary, they wouldn't understand it. Well, then I looked at it and didn't understand hardly any of it either, except there was memories of writing it, and so feelings would come up as opposed to memories. And I just remember always finish with something positive. I just had this vision that I had to finish the day with something positive, and always start the day with something positive. And I don't know. I don't know what it was. Maybe seeing how hard it was for my mum, I decided
yeah.
to be the opposite.
Yeah.
Maybe because she felt so alone, I made sure I surrounded myself with people. I don't know.
Yeah.
But what I do know is one day mum did say to me, well, I might not have taught you how to be, but I've certainly taught you how not to be. And there was a part of me that thought, oh, the poor, like she did the best she could. She did an
Yeah.
amazing job. Not one
Yeah.
of us is on drugs or went to prison or,
Yeah.
pregnant in our teens or anything like that. So she did a remarkable job. But she fought everything she's ever
Yeah.
done all her life. She fought for it, or she had to fight for it, or she had to fight in spite of it. So, I don't think my mum had a very easy life, put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. So when did you leave school? How old were you?
So I was asked to go back to do my final year.
Mm.
Back there, you could leave school at 15. I would have been 17 in my final
Yeah.
year. And so 16, I did what was called sixth form, which is the equivalent in Australia of year 11. And passed that really well. Got my
Yeah.
university entrance, did all of that. Went to go back the following year, and they asked me to be school captain. And so I had all these opportunities, but I got into a wonderful club in netball, and I really wanted to take my netball to the next level. And you couldn't play club netball if you were playing school netball. So netball took over, and I left school
Okay.
and I got a job in travel. And actually, no, I went to university for 6 months. I was doing law. I thought mum worked in a lawyer's office, and I remember working in the school holidays in there. And I remember, there was something very righteous about a law, and there was a part of me that wanted to make right what was wrong in our worlds.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there at law school 6 months in, and I was bored out of my tree, and I just sat there thinking, oh my gosh. And I couldn't remember this case study, and in law they always bring up different parts of the past that have had
Yeah.
certain things, and just didn't interest me. And it's no joke, I looked down on my desk that day, and I had the New Zealand Herald sitting on my desk, and the page that it was open to, I looked down and it said, travel the world, have a great time, become a travel agent and see the world, or something like that. And I thought, I'm applying. So I did, and I got the job. So at 17, I had left school and was working in travel. I'd had a terrible fallout with my mother at this age. And she changed the locks on the house and everything. I think for the first time I felt like I stood up to her over something, and obviously she wasn't used to that, and decided that I needed disciplining. So
Wow.
basically I got kicked out of home at 17, and she changed the lock so I couldn't come home. And that was a real rupture for me, because the one person, the one thing in my life that was so stable now had ousted me as well.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I was perfect or that I didn't deserve it. I don't know. I don't recall being that bad.
Yeah.
But you know, that was mum's way of coping. And it was really interesting because it was during that time I was earning $112 a week with my job. I had to find a flat, which was cost all my costs, expenses, bus, petrol, all of that was costing me $107 a week. And so I remember having five, sometimes $10 a week extra in my pocket to get food or to do things. So in many ways, I became incredibly self-sufficient,
Yeah.
incredibly self-driven.
Yeah.
Nothing was ever going to deter me and nothing was going to ruin me.
Mm.
And I was so freaking determined to make it by myself and not have to rely on anybody. But going back to my diary, I remember reading or seeing a post in there that the man I would marry, and it would be at 25, I'd have my first child at 30, I'd have two or three children, all by 35. I had this whole thing written, and then the man that I was going to marry, what he was like. And it's so fascinating when I look back on it. I just had no qualms. I've never doubted myself that I would get what I wanted. So, and I don't know where that comes from or why
Yep.
or how, but again, always had a more sunny disposition, always been a little bit more glass half full than empty,
Yeah.
have always tried to see the good in people and believed in others. And I've always felt like it'll always work out. So I've
Yeah.
had this kind of attitude in life that no matter how tough it gets, the sun will still come up tomorrow.
And do you think your mum's mum was like that?
Oh, she was beautiful. From what I remember, she died when I was nine, that year of
Yeah.
nine when mum and dad split, and Nana Myrtle Millicent Rose, her name. Um, she was a plant lover, and I'm sure I took on a love of plants through
Yeah.
her. And she was beautiful, very calming. My memories of her was very calm, very loving, very sweet.
Yeah.
And whereas my mum was probably the opposite, very ferocious, driven, freaking fight for anything, would go into battle no matter what, and would stand up for the underdog, you know. So I can see, and mum's even explained to me at times when her and her mum would have to go to the doctors with bruises and marks and things, and her mother would blatantly stand there and say, oh, we both fell down the stairs. And so there's a part of me that thinks that my mum, and you know, I've never asked her this, but there was a part of me that always felt that she was a bit disappointed that no one sort of stuck up for her, and probably lost a bit of love, maybe even respect for her own mother for that. But
Yeah.
again, until we've walked someone else's shoes, we don't really know the hows and the whys. And her mum could have been protecting her. And, you know, so I've never held blame or resentment or anything like that for any of the things that have occurred in my life. And I think also everything I went through my late teens, I became very interested in human nature, particularly as I was now working in travel and having to help people and seeing their stresses when flights didn't connect or the tickets were wrong, and I started getting really interested in people. And it was in my early 20s when I started deciding to be a personal trainer, and I wanted to get into the fitness and health world and take my netball further, and that I really became fascinated and interested in the anatomy, the physiology, biochemistry, and just got very interested in how we can get the best out of our bodies. And then that pathway introduced me to my aromatherapy teachers, and they had been trained by Tony Robbins, and one of my favorite aromatherapy teachers, Robert Tizarand, and they created this training network, which was very NLP based. And so at 23, I did my NLP certification. I did things like Landmark Forum. I was very much involved in priority management and learning the art of what it means to be a human. And I think I'm very, very grateful, even though my biggest fear was public speaking. These women, obviously, they decided I had something, and they chose me and one other lady to train and be their international presenters. But we had to go through this baptism of fire, learning how to speak and learning NLP and learning priority management and learning the forum and all of these different courses that I did, So I kind of feel like I was accidentally put into this world of personal growth. But of course, being a sportswoman, I was also very excited and willing to know what I could do, how far could I take my body, what would it look like, how far could I push it, and all those sorts of things. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
kind of sounds a bit all mashed together, but you can see it
No.
probably.
I know I've asked you this before and I keep forgetting. Your human design lines. Do you know, are you a 3-5? Can you
Wasn't
remember?
I a 3-6?
3-5,
Did
three
you think I
six.
was a 3-6?
I can't remember, but that three line is the human design that learns through lived experience. So three lines tend to have a lot of this kind of trial and error
No, I'm a
and swap and change.
4-6.
You're a 4-6.
4-6. I
A
just
four
looked it up.
six.
Yeah,
So
4-6.
a 4-6, the sixth line is a three line for the first half of your life. So this is this trial and error, trial and error, trial and error, and yeah, it tends to be a lot of life experience. It's how you learn much more than through books.
Well, definitely can say that. I've
Yeah,
learned a lot.
yeah. So then the second half, you become the role model. That's the sixth line. Yes,
Wow.
yes, yes, yes.
Wow.
So, but also the four line. Anyway, no, I'm not going to go down the. That's another conversation. We'll go down. Go back.
I love it.
So the journey from New Zealand to Australia, you
Yeah.
ended up you didn't start aromatherapy in New Zealand.
No, so
Okay.
I did my netball, got
Yeah.
to state level, and then when I didn't make it into the Auckland under 21s, I was sitting there again at the office and travel thinking, do I give this another shot or do I take a year off and go traveling? And I decided, because I was in travel, and I decided to go traveling. And so I got to do a number of different trips through travel. They were called educations or familiarizations, where we would get taken around the world or around New Zealand or Australia and did all these wonderful things. And I fell in love with Australia. My first big overseas trip was Melbourne, Sydney, and Canberra. And I just remember loving Melbourne, loving Sydney. And there was something about Australia. It always felt so big and bold and so many beautiful things. I remember a girlfriend at high school when we both passed and got our university entrance. I remember coming home and mum had bought me on my bed was a sweatshirt. And, when I think back to it, that's all she could afford. She got me a sweatshirt. And then I remember Lindley ringing me and saying, oh, Dad bought me a car and we're going to the Gold Coast as a celebration. I just remember that was the first time I realized how poor we were or how broke
Yeah.
we were.
Yeah.
And or just how blessed she was, or how
Yeah.
rich they seemed. They had a brand new
Yeah.
Commodore too. I remember that.
Yeah.
And so I remember thinking, well, I'm going to have to work for this because I need to have this. So when I had the opportunity to go traveling, I did. And then when I was in my early 20s, I met one of my dearest friends who's become a lifelong friend. We both worked and traveled together and we had the best time. She's got the funniest sense of humor, just one of the best humans you'll ever meet. And we would do stupid things like on a Friday night, we worked and traveled together. We'd busk outside the travel agency to raise money to go out for drinks and things like that. And we just had the best time. And then there was this competition that if we could sell enough Contiki tours, we would get a first class ticket to Perth, which is where her sister lived, return for 7 days. And we both decided we really wanted it. And so everyone that walked in the door, we basically convinced them to buy a Contiki tour and we ended up winning. So we won these two first class tickets, British Airways to Perth. And these were the days where we got up into the cockpit, sat there drinking Baileys
Oh.
on their knees, pretending we're flying planes. Like, it is so bizarre to even picture this now. And as we were landing in Perth, she goes, oh, I've got this mate here who's made it into the New Zealand cricket team. We should go to cricket. I actually think you'd really like him. And I just split up with a guy I'd been going out with for 5 years, from 14 to 19. And I was just like, oh, I don't know. Anyway, I said, cricket schmicket. Anyway, we went along to the cricket and at halftime, we went down to the dressing room, two blondes standing outside a dress. I just felt like such a groupie. It was just horrific. And I'm standing there, and he walks out, and he was so hot. And he reminded me of the list that I had in my diary.
Oh,
Sporty, funny, big smile, sense of
yeah.
humor. He was tall, not quite as tall in real life, but I had tall
Mm.
written in there. But anyway, he hugs Lizzie, and then he turned around and he hugged me. And I remember his smell. And I just remember thinking, he is so delicious. And then I turned back to Lizzie and I went, I actually quite like cricket. And anyway, we then met up with him and a couple of the other players afterwards. I fell hook, line, and sinker. And then when he touched my calves and said I had great calves, like that was it. I was gone. And anyway, we had to fly back to New Zealand, but it was in
Yeah.
that I went, I don't know what to do with my life now. And it was a couple of days later he rang. Remember, we didn't have mobiles back then. He rang the clinic and the girls all said, the travel agency, and they said there's a guy ringing from Perth. And I just looked up, my heart was pounding. Anyway, got on the phone and he just said, look, the New Zealand cricket team will be in Melbourne on Boxing Day. This was October 1987, November. And he said, Boxing Day test match in Melbourne. What if you come with the other wives and girlfriends? Well, first of all, he put me in the category of wife and girlfriend, so that felt really good. And I did. I quit my job, sold my car, sold everything, moved back home, and on Boxing Day 1987, I took a one-way ticket to Melbourne. And I travelled with Danny and the New Zealand cricket team for 3 weeks, which was a whole other world. It was just, these players I'd watched on TV. Now I'm travelling on a plane with them. It was so surreal. And then we got back to Sydney, and Danny had a groin injury, not my fault. And he got asked to go back to New Zealand to recover from this injury, and
Yeah.
I had to make a decision. So another, I guess, a fork in the road, a moment where you kind of, I don't know what to do here, but I knew that the life I was living with him was very surreal. And at 20, I decided, no, I will stay in Melbourne and then meet Lizzie on our World OE
Mm.
we were going to do the following year. So I'd just do some work. And so, yeah, I was in Melbourne. And then again, there's no accidents, Edwina. You can't script this. I was staying with Danny's dad, who lived in the Dandenong Mountains, the hills. And there was a gym just down the road. And I started working in the gym with my love of fitness and health and got my PT course and then ended up meeting right next to it was a natural therapies college. And there was this 10-week aromatherapy course advertised. And I just remember thinking plants, the smell. I walked in and I could smell this
Mm.
beautiful aroma. And I just knew I was in the right place. I had $180 in my bank account and the course was $160 and I signed up. And that 10-week course became 3 years of course after course. And, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And it was during that time I had to get up a certain number of log hours to get my sports massage and remedial therapies certificate and diploma. And I thought, what's the quickest way to do this? This is so boring, going to a 10K run for a couple of hours. And so someone had said to me, why don't you go to an ultra marathon? And so I did. I went to a 24-hour race, and the person I got assigned to was a man called Cliff Young. And that's where that whole journey opened up.
Yeah. Yeah. So I feel like there's a chapter here in when you were studying where because you and Danny didn't stay together and then you met somebody else for a time.
Yeah. So when he went back to New Zealand with the groin
Mm.
injury and I was living with his dad, it was during that time of studying and at the Natural Therapies College that the head of the Natural Therapies College just started really fussing over me.
Mm.
And I'd since found out that Danny had another girlfriend through the pipeline. It
Mm.
wasn't like on socials. I didn't get told that way. It was just through his dad saying something. And I knew I just had to get out of living with his dad. And so I took Ray up on going on a date, and he took me to the opera. He bought me bottles of perfume, took me to fancy restaurants. So I'm 20, I'd never really
Mm.
experienced all of this. And so I kept telling him I'm in love with a cricketer. I don't want to really be here. But anyway, kind of gradually over time, I just surrendered and leaned into it and then just put all my time into studying. And of course, Cliffy, when I told him how boring it was to watch 40 athletes run around a 400-meter track, he then suggested that I should run one rather than watch one. And so I signed up to my first 12-hour race. And
Mm.
that's where he became an incredible mentor. And Ray was actually a running coach as well. So that whole world of running opened up my world, and I just got right into doing ultras and 24-hour races and 12-hour races.
Mm.
So
He was,
netball was left, and
yeah.
now I'd become a runner. But it's interesting because, when I was 15, 16, I had a dream of playing netball for New Zealand. But if you'd said to me, it's written in the stars that you'll run for Australia, I wouldn't have never known how that would have
Mm,
mapped or how it came. But I've always had this belief, even from when I was little, things will always work out. You'll always get on the right train at the right time. People will show as they present themselves. And then, of course,
mm,
during my studies of aromatherapy and NLP and all of those, I started to realize that life is just a perception of what we think based on our beliefs, values, and of course our limiting beliefs and our self-sabotage, or the things that we've based on
mm,
experience. So nothing is real is what I
mm,
started to really unpack.
mm,
And then that even became a bigger illusion, because then you start questioning everything. And I just
mm,
love that pathway. I love, is it
mm,
true? Is it real? What is reality? So that's what opened up the quantum realm: physics, physiology, psychology, biomechanics, of course, understanding then the relativity of how do we hold emotions in the body? Do emotions speak through us? Are injuries related? Is it emotionally driven? And you can go down a massive
yeah.
rabbit hole here.
Yeah.
Mm.
I listened to something recently that was there's five universal truths, and I won't go through them all, but one of them is fear is an illusion and love is truth. Mm.
Love that.
Um,
Love that.
and it shows up in fairy tales all the time. So Ray had a big impact on you, and I feel like this is part of your story that leads to what comes next. So he was much older than you, and obviously did a fantastic job of making you feel safe and secure and all the things until he didn't.
Mm. Yeah, at that point, I didn't really know what it meant to have a safe neurological or nervous system. Like, I think I have probably lived in fight or flight for most of my life. And even with him, there was an illusion I felt safe. And I knew it was temporary, but I just didn't know how or what. But because he was a great running coach, he was an exercise physiologist, I loved his mind. And yes, he was double my age. I was 20, he was 40. And that felt weird, because the man I was in love with was only 2 years older than me, and I just wanted to be with him. But I also knew he wasn't ready for me. I knew he was too young to appreciate what I would mean in his life, and I knew I had to let him go. I remember ringing her after Danny left Sydney, when he went back to New Zealand, and I was just a sobbing mess. And she just said that beautiful quote, if you love something, set it free. If it comes back, it's yours. If it doesn't, it never was. And I held on to that. I had that printed out everywhere. And I just kept believing one day that Danny would wake up. But in the meantime, I thought, well, I can't stop living. And I so got into my running and studying, and then just Ray kind of swept me up in amongst all of that. But as I went on through that relationship, I remember thinking, I can't do this. It just doesn't feel right. I wasn't enjoying his company so much. I didn't know he was a gambler and a heavy drinker, even though I was living with him. It's so bizarre. Is it because I blocked it and I didn't want to see it? Or was he just hiding it? That's why I did long distance running, because I never had to be around anyone for very long. And I remember having a facial bought for me, and my skin broke out for a year. I had this terrible rash all over my face. I looked like I'd been almost burnt. My whole face was so bad. And so long distance running was my savior. And I would just get out and go, and no one could see me. No one would look at me funny. I didn't care where I was. I just kept running. And I guess that's what, made me a good runner. Maybe, I don't know. It wasn't something I thought I was ever really good at, but I ended up running for Australia and set a world record to be the youngest female to run 100 miles in less than 24 hours. So there was something there. And all I remember thinking when they gave me that trophy was, God, I spent 4 hours off the track whinging. What could I do if I didn't whinge and complain? And so to me, there's always more.
Yeah.
There's so much more to get, to grab. But I remember thinking with Ray, if this is my lot, this isn't where I want to be. And then it was a case of, well, how am I going to leave him? and how am I going to do this? And, there's another whole story to it, but basically one of the students, which was like a mother figure to me, Margie, she just pulled me aside one day and she said, you don't have to tell me anything. All I want you to know is I'm noticing you. You've lost a lot of weight. I'm concerned about you as a mother. And I just want you to know I'm here if you want to talk to me. And so I told her all about Danny, and I told her about wanting to go home. My mum was about to have a hysterectomy, and I just felt so far away from her, and it just all felt. And so anyway, she helped. That's when I realized all the money I thought I'd saved, I thought I'd go and buy a ticket. And that's when I went to my bank account and realized me handing over all the power of him paying my wages. There was nothing, excuse me, there was nothing in the account. And I knew I couldn't confront him about it because he also had this kind of more aggressive, almost violent side to him that I never wanted to expose. Um, anyway, long story short, I took the courage. Margie booked the flight for me. I didn't know her and Mum were in cahoots together and trying to make it all happen. And I had to leave there, but acting like I was only going for 10 days. So that he wouldn't get angry. And he did get angry. He ripped me out of the car, and I remember him pinning me up against the car, and cars driving past going, are you all right? And I just remember thinking, this is my sign. I have to get out of here. So the next day he drove me to the airport, thank God. And I knew that would be the last I saw of him. So I got on that plane, went back to New Zealand, and Danny, my mother, sister, and brother were all at the airport. And yeah, that's when I realized, there was the man. That was the one I wanted to be with.
So Danny re-enters.
He did. He did. The night he re-entered like a bloody knight sitting there at the airport. He was so cute, and probably doesn't realize the impact of seeing him at the airport that night in Shining Harbour literally felt true, because that's the first time getting home and then moving in with him that I really felt safe.
Yeah.
And it's interesting you talk about that safety, because only a matter of, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, I was seeing a chiropractor in Brisbane, and he had been seeing my 2 children. And he said, I've been dying to meet you. I've got an idea of what you're about. And anyway, after doing questions and history taking and all of that, he then turned around and he goes to me, you're the biggest liar I've ever met. And I just looked at him, I went, I beg your pardon. And he goes, Wan, you act like this super calm, super driven, super soft person, but underneath it, your legs are going like this, and I sat there and I thought, oh, how insulting, how rude. And I still struggle with those words that he said, but I also, it really made me question everything, because, and what it does make me do now is that when I do feel like I'm racing or I'm on edge or things like that, I go, oh, come back, stop the legs pedaling and take some breaths. So he called me on it. And then he was also the one that said to me I needed to eat meat, because I hadn't eaten meat since I was 16. And he kept pushing at it. Why don't you eat meat? It's the best thing out. You should be eating meat. And then I turned around to him and I said, I don't know, maybe it's because I was abused by a butcher. I don't know, in a butchery shop. And he just looked at me and he goes, okay, well, you're the first person I'm going to say that doesn't have to eat meat. And then, and he asked me, how do you sleep? And I said, I don't sleep well unless I know, Danny's home. And he said, my dear, all your life you've been dreading who's going to come in and hurt you. And that was the first time someone had actually probably named something I didn't know was even there at an unconscious level, that fear of who was coming into the room or who was going to touch me or hurt me. So yeah, he helped expose that one. So I think we're all a work in progress, and the more I dug it and deepened it, the more I so felt proud of the little girl that survived all of that. And just, I still to this day think, how did she stay so bright and so happy and so into life and love and people, and never hated on men, never have, all of the things that are the qualities, I guess, of me. I'm just so glad they weren't shattered through all of those hurts. And I'm very grateful that I still have such a Pollyanna love of life.
You do. You absolutely do. I feel like there's I in one of the other real life fairy tales, there's a sense of double life that starts to happen when there's trauma, and the part of us that gets into a very masculine mode of just doing. I mean, to listen to your story, there's no breath, like it's just this to this to this to this to this, that busyness of filling up life. And then I think we get to a point in our lives where when we stop, then things start to come up. And I think it's so interesting that often it's somebody who says something to us that we don't want to hear that unlocks that little door in our psyche that goes, oh. And mostly it starts with an FU moment, or how dare you, or it was actually Karen Smith. I've got one of those with Karen Smith. She said something to me that made my blood boil for a while. But afterwards, I had this, like the slow dawning realization that what she said was very accurate. But they're a gift, and these people are like, I was going to say like another mother that says things to you that you don't necessarily want to hear, but you need to hear. And I mean, this was a man, not a mother, but a parent, I guess.
Yeah.
Hard truths.
Yeah, and I think NLP, going down that pathway, I never understood NLP for years, even though I'd done all the training. It was very textbook to me. So I hadn't linked it all until probably in the last decade, when I redid my master's, and then I did hypnotherapy, and then I did my master's in hypnotherapy, that I started to understand the linguistics, the languaging, the patterning, and what we do with these circuit pathways in our brain that feels very normal, but it's not normal, it's just common. And we create these pathways to make our reality. And that's why, I stopped, I used to think of people that had depression, well, that was a choice, or, you could stop it. Or I would have opinions that people, why would you go back to someone that's abused you or hurt you, And being young, and I'm not saying I was out there, with placards saying that, but I do recall being arrogant in my thoughts of it's black and white. And it's not until I really went back and restudied NLP and did my master's again that I sat there and realized actually the reason why women return to men who abuse them is it's an element of familiarity, which feels common, even though it's not normal, and it feels safe because that's all they've ever known. And that's when I started to understand the power of hypnosis, where it's not about hypnotizing people, it's about unhypnotizing us from the dream that we think is reality. And how do we give you a new, or not you give yourself a new reality, a new possibility. And when we understand that nothing is real, it's just a perception of what we think to believe to be real, that opens up another whole can of worms. And it just, for me personally, it allowed me to forgive myself, to give myself permission to be curious and question everything, to know that I've never got it right, but I've also never got it wrong. It just is. And that everything that's felt wrong or has felt really challenging has actually been more an opportunity to learn and grow. And had I not been through all of those things as a little girl and in my teens and all of that, then would I have been so interested in psychology and human behavior? Would I have really embraced my love of plants and knowing the smell and how we use our pheromones and fear and love and what they do? I don't think I'd be the person I am today without all of those things. So as much as I would never wish hardship on anybody, and I don't want anyone to have to deal with it, in all good fairy tales and all good books and all good movies, the heroine or the hero does go through an abyss or a transformation or a knockback or a setback or a letdown or a big hurt or a loss. And then the human spirit, in my humble opinion, the comeback story is what we all love. It's what we get drawn into with books and movies and stories and shows. And so, and then when I went to India, in 2011, I had a chance to have a one-on-one with His Holiness, the 12th Khenting Tai Satupa, who was the Tibetan Buddhist education, the head of all education. And I got chosen out of 400 people to have a one-on-one with him. And I'd sat there at the beginning going, I want to talk to him one-on-one. So I don't know how I manifested that, but the power of manifestation is very strong in me, and I do believe in it. And I sat there with him, and you'll love this, Edwina, because he goes, what is it, child? What is it you'd like to ask? And I said, yes, I have a very important question for you. And he goes, and what might that be? And I said, why do humans have to go through such pain and suffering and anguish and hurt and drama? And how come it's so cruel? And he goes, ha, ha, ha. Very human question. And I sat there and he goes, my dear, how could you possibly understand love without fear? How could you possibly understand the highs in life without knowing the truth and depths of the lows? How could you ever understand the light without going through the dark? So, my dear, you have to know that life is a polarity. It's full of the dichotomies and the opposing forces, and it's up to you to choose which one you want to spend most time in. And mic drop. So, yeah. And I've never forgotten that one either. So, the teacher appears when the student is ready.
It's interesting listening to your story. I feel like you lived that anyway.
Yeah, I think so, which is why I felt so brash asking the question. But it confirmed for me.
Yeah, it's confirmation.
It confirmed for me that, I have had some shit. I have fallen into the depths. I have laid on my bathroom floor in the fetal position. I have gone through extraordinary loss. And, moving forward into my life, there was still more to come. And I sit here now at a good place in my life and I think, please tell me I've done all the learnings and the lessons, but no doubt we haven't. We've got parents sadly to lose. We've got pets that we lose. We've got accidents that occur. Like, it never ends. And so what I've learnt is that what we do when life is good or when we're feeling good, that's the time to really do the work on yourself, to get a repertoire of tools so that not if, but when you face hard times, you've got this armory that you can call on to at least gracefully work your way through it rather than feeling like life is happening to you and it's pushing you and it's not fair and how come and why me. So I've never been that person. Why me? How come? I've always been like, I wonder why this is happening now. I wonder what I have to learn now. And when you were talking about fairy tales just before, my grandmother, the one that was still alive till she was 95, she was an amazing baker, Dorothy May. She immigrated to Australia at 90. So I always say to people, if you think you're too old, please. Dorothy did it at 90. You can do it. But she would come and stay with me here on the Sunshine Coast, and I'd drive her back to Kingaroy where my dad was and my stepmother. And we were driving down the freeway one day, and she said she'd put her hand on my lap and she goes, oh dear, penny for your thoughts. And the two kids were in the back seat. They had their DVD players on. We didn't even have iPads or iPhones then. But they were watching their DVD player and they had headphones on. And I said, oh, Grandma, I can't share this one. And she goes, oh, darling, a problem shared is a problem half solved. And so I said, oh, Grandma, I've just got this terrible vision. I'm going to have a head-on car accident. And I just feel sick about it because I've also just finished reading this book called The Law of Attraction, and it's called The Secret. And the more you think about it, the more you're going to create it. And I know I'm really good at manifesting, and I'm just really scaring myself right now. And she goes, oh, that must be terrible. And I said, it is. And then she puts her hand on my lap and she goes, darling, I think I'd like you to know that when you have those negative thoughts, those fears, those worries, we don't listen to the angels when they're telling us nice things, but we do show up and we do pay attention when there's bad or negative. And she goes, so whenever you hear something negative or you feel something you're worried about, that's just your angels asking you to drive more carefully. And so just pay attention, sweetheart. And I've never forgotten it. And so now, and then ever since that happened, so that would be 20 odd years ago, whenever I have a negative thought or something, I always think, oh, what are the angels? Where are my guides? Who's talking to me? What do I need to hear? What do I need to see? And so I get curious with pretty much everything. Before I lay an assumption or a belief to it, I do try to unpack it or understand it before I own it, if that makes sense.
I'm loving this conversation.
Yeah.
So let's keep going. You got back to New Zealand. You and Danny reunited. What was, obviously I don't want to brush over everything that happened with Ray. I feel like that was a really pivotal experience in your life. But you and Danny reunited back in New Zealand. What was the next kind of evolution for you?
I think what occurred through that period is I also had to get the rest of my stuff back from Australia, and I didn't know how I was going to do that. So I did have the courage to ring Ray and say it was over, and that I would not be coming home. Well, he lost it and said the police would be onto me, that he'd hunt me down, and all of those threatening things that someone that's very unstable is going to say. And I just think that was him afraid and upset and all of those things. Anyway, I don't want to say anything that will offend anybody, but I also found out that I was pregnant to Danny at that point, about 3 or 4 months later. And I was, no, about 3 months later, and I was just distraught. There was no way I was ready for a child, and Danny wasn't. He had just made it into the New Zealand cricket team. And so I was in a world of pain with that and what to do. And so we decided when we went, he'd come back to Melbourne with me to get my stuff. And I had an appointment at the hospital, and I got to make a choice that was the right choice for me. And we did a beautiful ceremonial ritual around that. And there was a lot of counselling, which was great, to ensure that any decisions us women make we don't feel guilt for it for later. And so I just, forgive me for anyone listening to this if they don't agree with those decisions. I'm certainly not telling you this to offend anybody, but I did make that decision to not continue the pregnancy. But at the same time, we went up and saw Danny's dad up in the Dandenongs, who was in a world of pain himself. He was like living in this terrible flat. He had been drinking and taking drugs, and he was just a mess. And so we both felt, Danny felt he lost his father in that moment. He realised that he was never going to be able to save him. I'd gone through this sense of loss we both had with that, and we both drove back down from the Dandenongs in a world of pain, both of us sobbing, and then just held each other and then promised each other we would be each other's guide forevermore. And so got back to New Zealand. And then it's interesting because you talk about, the retreat or the stillness. Then Danny went to England for 10 or 12 weeks, and I was by myself. And it was a really nice, I didn't want to be away from him at all, but I also remember really falling in love with spending time with myself and studying. And I was working in the All Blacks physio clinic at the time, so I was hanging out with top elite sports people again, and I was back into the whole realm of learning nutrition and exercise physiology and anatomy and just loving all of that side of things. And it was during that time that my aromatherapy teachers that I'd known for some time rang me and said, we'd love you to be our international presenter, because I'd finished my aromatherapy diploma, done all my advanced clinical practitioner work by February 1991. And so when they invited me back, look, public speaking, as I said, was my greatest fear. But even though in my head I'm going, no, thank you, my heart just kept saying yes. And a part of NLP is to get out of the comfort zone of life. We have to go through the fear and the learning into the growth zone. And so I knew this fear was sitting there, and it was an opportunity I should take. And so they flew me to Melbourne, and I did all my studies there. This is now, 92. And Danny and I got married in 1993. And so now my world just felt completely right. And now I'm an international presenter. I'm speaking, I'm teaching people about aromatherapy, my love of plants. Life just felt so beautiful. We bought our first home. Honestly, I remember thinking, I can't imagine life not being this perfect ever again. And of course, the hammer comes down, and we're confronted
the wheel turns.
When we get safe and comfortable, another learning opportunity comes along. And now Danny's career has coming to the end, and he got dropped from the New Zealand cricket team. We found out on the news, on the radio, driving home to go and pack to go to Wellington. We found out that way. It was horrible. There was just all this. So he was feeling very discombobulated and unaware and unsure of where he wanted to go and what to do. He was 31. And that's when I said to him, he goes, you know what, I can't play. I don't want to just play first class cricket. It's international. And so we went through this whole process, and his mum was an NLP practitioner and hypnotherapist as well. So she took us through this beautiful guided hypnosis together. And Danny came to the decision that he would retire from international sport. He'd always wanted 10 years, and this was his 11th year. So in a way, he'd manifested this as well, you could say. And then I said to him, well, if you're retiring, let's make babies. And so, yeah, within that year, we had beautiful Taylor. She was born in 98, and then Jacob was born in 99. And again, bliss, this bubble, baby bubble bliss. Even though I was exhausted, and we all know what that feels like, I was just so grateful and so humbled to become a mum and to hold our babies and to go through that. And then sadly, when Taylor was 5 and Jacob would have been 4, or 4 and 5 and 6, Danny's beautiful sister tragically out of the blue took her life, and she had 3 children. We'd just lost a whole lot of money in a property deal that went wrong. And all of a sudden, it just felt like this bubble got burst. We lost Danny's sister, which uncovered a whole lot of things in family dynamics and misunderstandings, and all of us feeling, sad and grief and immense loss and tragedy and worry and why not and how come and what did we do. And it was just such a horrific time. And I watched my husband, who's now lost his career and pretty much his identity, lost his sister. We lost our house in a property deal that went wrong, and we'd lost this money we'd invested. And so there was just this immense amount of loss. And I remember sitting there thinking, and it just kept happening. And then Danny's dad tried to take his life, and it was just one thing after the other. And when we were sitting there at the therapist having therapy, and we looked up and she's sobbing, and we're both just sitting there looking at her going, are you all right? And she's just going, I don't know if I can take this anymore. And that's when it hit us how bad it was. But we were just sitting there just telling her what was going on. I think when you're in it, sometimes you can't see, you're so close to it, you can't see how really bad it is. And so I said to Danny, I think we've got to get out of here. I think we just need a break. And so I texted him. By the stage we did have phones, and I texted him when I was on a plane traveling north in New Zealand, and I said, do you want to go and live in Australia? And we both love Australia. We both have an affinity for Australia, and we both had lived here before. And of course, he'd played a lot of cricket here. And so I thought he'd come back going, we better talk. And he just went, hell yes, when? And I'd met a lady called Cindy O'Meara over here. One of my clients had been to one of her talks and reckoned he'd met is it doppelganger or whatever you call it?
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
And that she was very much like me. And I looked her up on the internet. She was a nutritionist, a researcher, and I freaking loved everything about her. I bought everything, faxed my order through, got the cassette tape. The cassette didn't work, faxed her again. And then she ended up coming to New Zealand, and she bought me a new cassette. And that just started a very long friendship. So when I was sitting on the plane going to Kerikeri, I said to her, we're thinking of moving to the Sunshine Coast. She going back straight away going, oh my God, when? And I said, maybe September. And she goes, oh my gosh, our tenants move out of our beach house. It's yours on the 30th of August, which again, you can't script this. No. And so we did. We sold everything, sold our house, sold everything I'd done. I'd already written 3 books by this stage with Flirt. Like, we just sold everything, and we decided we'd come to Australia for 2 years to take a breath. And that was in 2006, and we're still here in 2026. So yeah. 20 years later, we found our home, we found our place. It wasn't easy. It took a long time, as I'm sure anyone that's moved state or moved cities or moved countries, it's a way of finding yourself again and finding a way of being back in a community where you feel you belong. And that's where I really learnt the art of patience, because you jump in, but you get what you give. So you've got to give it your all when you move into those places. And I just picked up from where I'd left off.
Well, not quite the same, but yeah.
It was big.
The next big thing, and it feels, as I listen to your story, there's a repetition of a lot of things happening at once. Possibly Ray was a one-off in that But when you were 9, it was like your grandmother and the sexual abuse, and there was quite a few things that
Divorce.
happened, divorce, and
Mm.
and then you hit another. How old were you when Danny's sister committed suicide? And
36. So I was 20 when I was going through
Mm,
all the thing with Ray. And it wasn't just Ray, that my skin was a mess,
that's
remember?
right.
I found out I'd lost all my money. So there was quite a few things all at once that
That's
hit me at
right.
once, which is an interesting observation you've made. And then, of course, when Danny's sister died, we had the house,
Properties.
the business, and so there was a number of, yeah, they do kind of come
Yeah.
in amounts. And so, yeah, that's an interesting observation in itself. But we went through a lot then, and then that's when I realized my husband just, he did not have the tools. He's such a sensitive, yeah, he's a very sensitive soul. And for him to lose his sister was just so disruptive and so tragic. And I don't think he will ever recover from it. I don't think we ever do. We just learn to live with it.
Yeah.
But he went through that. And then because he'd lost his money, and Danny's a saver and he's very good at being very, safe with money. His world was very ruptured, but then the only job he could get was on the road. So now my husband is away 7, 8 months of the year,
Gosh.
and he's now not in this hub. So the four of us were
Yeah.
always the safe hub. Now I continued the hub and continued raising the children,
Mm.
and of course we stayed in touch with Danny a lot because by this stage mobile phones were around, so we had a lot more opportunity for contact, immediate contact. But Danny missed out on things like watching Taylor dance or Jacob play rugby or school formals or graduations. And so a lot of it was done through phoning and texting. But, until you've walked someone's shoes, you don't know how hard it is. And when we were sitting there with a therapist, because to me, whenever you're going through a really tough time and you can't find the answers, get help. There's no weakness in asking for
Yeah.
help or coaching or
Yeah.
therapy or anything. If anything, it'll help you get through it quicker because
Mm.
someone else can see it. And so that I'm really grateful we did that. And when I heard Danny say, putting his hotel, he travels the world business class, stays in 5-star hotels, talks about a game he loves. Most men would say living the dream. Um, but for Danny, when he was so down and so low and so upset, questioning everything about himself, he said to the therapist that putting his key into his hotel room felt like he was going into his prison cell every night. Now that broke my heart because for the first time I had a metaphor, an analogy that actually made, here I was thinking he was living the good life, had all
Mm.
the freedom in the world, but he's a homebody. He loves being around his children and his family and his mum and his sister and all of those things. So he went through hell and it really disrupted our marriage. And so then we also then lost the rest of our money. So we'd put the property that we sold back in New Zealand, we put that into Storm Financial. And so while he was away, we then found out that all of that money, that company had fallen over. And now we had no money. Like we'd lost the house before, but we still had investment property, but now we'd lost everything. And that's when, and then I found out Danny had been partying and taking drugs, and he doesn't mind me sharing this because it's a part of our story. Um, he just did everything he could to escape it. In fact, he even tried to take his own life. He was hoping someone would take his life. And when I heard him talk like that, it was heartbreaking. And even though I wanted to kill him at the same time, there was a part of me, and I'll never forget Jacqueline, who was French. She was very spiritual, but also a psychologist. And she was in her late 80s. And she said, oh my darling, do you love this man? And I looked at him and I went, "Oh, yes." And she goes, do you love this woman? And he goes, absolutely. And she goes, oh, when there's love, there is no problem. And that was our session for the day. She told us to go home and think about that. When there's love, there is no problem. And I just thought, what a waste of money, what a waste of time,
Yeah.
how dumb. And I've never forgotten that line. And then
Yeah.
another time we went back and she said, my darlings, you have to remember your marriage will never be the same. But if you work on yourself, Danny, and you work on yourself, Kim, then I'm telling you the potential that your marriage could be better than it ever was is definitely there. And we both hung on to that, and we both agreed not to talk about the past, that if we bring it up or bring anything about loss or anything that Danny had experienced or gone through or wanting to not be here or any of those voices, we would talk about it with a really strong framework around it, which was so helpful so that neither of us went into the abyss with it. And she said to us, and this is no joke, I'd like you to give it 4 seasons before you make any big life-making decisions. And I said, Jacqueline, why 4 seasons? Like, why not 365 days? Why not 12 months? Why not a year? Why did you just say 4 seasons? And she said, oh, darling, we all know some of us in marriage are better in winter, others are better in spring. Some are better in summer than they are autumn. You have to allow the full potentiality of each person in each season before you make a big decision. And you know what? As a therapist, as a coach, as a marriage celebrant, I've said that to all my couples and all my people since. When you want to make a really big life-changing decision, give it 4 seasons. So yes, she was another beautiful, inspirational mentor with a lot of treasures that just really helped me traverse the challenges and struggles of life.
That's going to become when there's love, there's no problem.
Well, I nearly called my book The Art of Self-Love that. And I've got another book that I've been writing in the background called When There Is Love, There Is No Problem. And in fact, with the beautiful His Holiness, he said the same thing. Darling, there's only 2 forces in life, love or fear. There's nothing else. There's only love or fear. Everything negative sits under fear, or anything that challenges you sits there, and everything else is love. And when there's love, there is absolutely nothing to worry about. And I'm like, oh, isn't that a beautiful place to get to?
It is a lens to look through. And, every fairy tale ends, well, not every, but most fairy tales that people know end in happily ever after. And it's always this sense of, the unattainable. But I think the real understanding of that is the balance of masculine and feminine, and the understanding that the heart is supposed to lead, that love is supposed to lead, and the masculine is in support of that. But if we lead with fear, then the heart gets lost. And I think that is what happily ever after is. But we're not supposed to have that from day dot. That's why we go through everything as part of the learning to get to this point. But it's the articulation of it, it's the understanding of it that helps us to stay connected to it. Otherwise, everything just feels random and reactive as opposed to purposeful and meaningful, which
Agreed.
is, yeah.
And that's helped me so much as a mother, because as a mother, I don't want my kids to ever experience pain, to ever have their hearts broken, to ever have anyone hurt them. And, and that's so delusional and so fantasy land. And then what I've found through everything I've been through is, instead of pushing them from behind or pulling them from the front, I would sit beside them and walk through the fire with them. Understanding their pain, promising them that they'll get through it, knowing that through this we become a better version of ourselves, and just gave them hope. And, not long ago it was Mother's Day, and I was having lunch with my children, and they both thanked me for the gift of always seeing and having hope, and always knowing that we'll get through it. And I just, maybe, I don't know. And I remember many, many years ago hearing Dr. Wayne Dyer speaking in Brisbane. And he said, if you really look at your life and think about the doors of opportunity and all the different parallel universes potentially that we could have been living, and all of the things that have occurred through life, he's always sort of said that, ultimately the day you're going to depart this world is already mapped out, but how we go and why we go is through the doors of opportunity, which doors we choose and how we choose to live our life. So that helped me to really appreciate Danny's sister's loss, even though it was suicide. It could have been a car accident. It could have been, God forbid, murder. It could have been an illness. But because of the doors, the things she had chosen, it ended up being that. And it just took away the the why, the how come into, because otherwise, why does a 2-year-old get leukemia? Or why does a 90-year-old who's drunk and smoke all their life just happily go off to sleep one night? You cannot tell me that there is a reason to the actions we take or how we're supposed to live our lives. It's not that random, I don't think. And so, beautiful Wayne, what I loved about him was that he always had this beautiful big vision, this big purpose. And he always said that, when I look back on my life and wonder why I was put here, what was my biggest learning? What was the biggest thing I had to learn? He goes, I was a young boy with an alcoholic mother and father, a lot of abuse. And my brothers and I were put into different hostels and foster homes. And he goes, and I look back and I realized my life was about resilience and persistence. And he goes, what better way to learn resilience and persistence than grow up in a life like that? And the minute he said that, I sat there and the word forgiveness came up in my heart. And I looked at it and I thought, forgiveness. Now, I don't want to say forgiveness in the sense that I forgive someone because they're wrong, but forgiveness for some of the outcomes. So I was able to forgive those men. I was able to forgive Ray. I was able to forgive Danny for what he went through. I was able to forgive my family and most importantly, forgive myself, for the high bar that I set and sometimes feel like I fail or fall off or don't get to or disappoint. And I think I've learned through reading and listening to different beautiful, amazing souls or podcasts like this, where you get to hear people's real life lived experiences, that ultimately we're all the same. We're all living this thing called life to the best that we can. There's always something we want more of, and there's always something we want less of. We all have choices. We all choose which trains we get on and off and the people that we take with us and drop off at different stops. And we basically all have the same, but we just have different stories and experiences to create these emotions and these feelings and these lived experiences. And I'd like to think as I'm getting older, Edwina, with beautiful women like you, I've looked at this and I just said this analogy at a men's group I was speaking to the other day. And I said, imagine you're this person and behind you is the person, the version of you that has maybe screwed up or has done parts or isn't the version that you particularly want to be all the time. But in front of you is a version of you that you're aspiring to be. And, you'd love to be more like that or want more of that. And of course, when we look at life and we imagine people at either end of that spectrum, who would we rather hang out with? Well, most of us would say we want to hang out with the version of us that we want to become, or the version of people that inspire or delight or lead or transform and all of that. And so I always say to people now, remember, look through the windshield of life, not the rear vision mirror. Because when we look at the rear vision mirror, it's helpful for safety and understanding of where we're at. But life should be lived through the windscreen. It should be lived looking forward and always moving towards that version of yourself that you know. So ultimately, even our worst versions of ourselves are the best in that moment. Otherwise, it would have been different. So I'd love to think that people could forgive themselves more for the indiscretions, the mistakes, the problems, and actually embrace the part of them that gets through it with resilience and consistency and persistence and love and desire to be better, want more, and to live a bigger, better, fuller version of themselves. And most of us would say, if you look back on the timeline of your life, all those forks in the roads, those big moments, those pivotal possibilities or times when we feel we've had ruptures, are also the turning points or the platform where we get to reinvent who we are or create a new story or have new characters come into play or take a lesson that we then have the ability and the freaking privilege to pass on to our children or other people who would like to hear it. So I think that's where the wisdom of aging and moving into our crone and wise woman years is such a privilege, as my grandmother said, denied to many. So I really feel privileged to have lived that. That's not to say that when I'm in the middle of it and I'm lying on my bathroom floor, I want you to go, oh, what a gift. If we do that to someone, they're going to tell us where to go.
One day you're going to appreciate this moment.
Jacqueline actually said that to me. She said, "Oh, darling, this is a gift." I mean, a fucking gift? Are you kidding me? I can't even open the box, let alone pull the ribbon off. And she goes, "Darling, trust me, in a year, 2 years, 3 years, you will see the gift." And that was the other thing I learned from her, is that patience for the gift. You don't always get it straight away.
Yeah, she's so right. She's so right. I always, if I think about this desire for stillness and calm and for everything to be nice all the time, and I think about nature shows us these fabulous skies that go so black, purple with rain that falls and the thunder and then the storms that roll through and knock over a tree. But there's new shoots that grow up and these fabulous sculptures of trees that grow out of, destruction. And it's like, this is life, like this is the beautiful, rich life that, yes, we don't desire the storms, but from the storms something amazing always comes. It always comes.
Does.
Yeah,
it sure does. And I think the key for me has always been keep your heart open. Don't ever let anyone or thing take that part of you that only you have access to. You have the lock, you have the key. No matter what happens, you still are the one that can manifest and create and, come out of those storms with more grace and courage and wisdom and strength and resilience. But it's sometimes we have to actually fall right in there and actually be in the mosh pit, the mud, the freaking hideousness of it, and walk that fire. It's horrible. But then another teacher said to me that if we try and hurry it with things like drugs or alcohol or sex or, getting lost on Netflix or avoidance, then at some point the meat cleaver will hit you again and you'll have to learn it again. And that changed my perspective on everything. I'm like, okay, I'm in the abyss right now. I have to live this. I have to get help. I have to get through, because I want to get through it. Not that I'm rushing it to avoid it, but I just want to know that I'm safe, I'm normal, this is hurting, I'm a mess. As I said to one of my girlfriends, we always ring each other. If level 10 is enlightenment, we'll ring each other sometimes and go, level 1 soul moment. And Cindy will go, I'm here, I'm listening. When we say level 1 soul moment, that's you need to drop everything, I need you. And then I listen, and she just listens, and I'll bleat, or she'll do the same to me. And then when they've had enough, we'll go, anything else? And they'll go, no. Is there anything you need from me? I don't know. Well, what have you learned from this? And we'll challenge. And then it's like, do you need anything else? No. And so sometimes it's just a safe place to process all the things we're not meant to say, and all the things that are horrible, and all the swear words you want to say, and everything that's just sucks about every part of it. I just love the fact that you can have a place to just freaking get it out. And then I'll go for a run, and I'll run hard to the point where I can't breathe and nearly throw up. And I'm like, and then it's just, I don't know, just gonna get it.
I had a thing with my girlfriends during the great lockdown when we were all going completely balmy. And I started to get triggered by people saying, I'm fine. I'm like, are you fine like your head's in the oven? Or are you fine like, the sun's shining? What is I fine? Like, we're not going to say I'm fine anymore, because that doesn't tell me anything.
No. I know the acronym, freaking insecure, neurotic, and emotional is what that stands for. Whenever I say fine, I'm not.
No. Fine's
Ask
not a
any
good
husband when he
indication.
asks his wife, are you good? Fine. We know you're not. Boy, there's an abyss.
Oh, good. Look, why don't we wind up? I know you've got these 4 beautiful, during Embody the Empress, we talked about these beautiful oils, but I'd hate for anyone that doesn't know about them not to know. So did you want to take a minute to tell us about the 4 oils that the seasonal oils that you made?
Because I have an aromatherapy company, and I've always been intrigued by smell. And if we understand how smell is one of the first senses, the only sense that bypasses the thinking brain. So when we inhale something, and you know this yourself from a memory, you can think of, well, do you have a memory that takes you back in time? I could ask you personally. Do you have one that the minute you
Oh,
smell it, you're
do you know
transported?
the thing that is so present for me right now because I've been a grandmother for a week and a half is the smell of a newborn baby. Oh my God. I don't know
And
if you can
so,
bottle that.
yes. And so I want to ask you, what does it conjure up for you instantly? The minute you smell that
Oh,
baby, where do you go?
pure love. It's
Yeah.
just, oh, yeah.
And potentially to the moment you had your babies, that
Mm,
sense, that smell,
mm,
that incredible
mm.
gift that these beautiful beings are. For someone it could be the smell of lavender reminds them of their grandmother, or for some it
Yeah,
could be the smell of a certain aftershave reminds them
yeah,
of a certain man that they
yeah,
either lived with or dated. And we know that it evokes emotions in ways that we can't even
yeah,
articulate why or how. So just even you and the way you just sunk right into that emotional feeling of a newborn baby. So smell drives emotions, emotions drive behaviors, behaviors become outcomes, actions, and habits. So to me, smell has always played a significant part in what I do on a daily basis. And even as I said to you, when I met Danny and I smelt the nape of his neck, I remember smelling him and thinking, I really like this man. And if you strip it right back to primal kind of energy, yes, visually, we women look at men for their strong glutes, strong hamstrings, strong hands or legs or whatever to provide and protect. They looked at our boobs and our butts to make sure we'd house all their babies. And so that's it from a very primal visual point of view. But then our DNA would talk when you drink in their smell. There's something about someone you're deeply in love with that their smell is intoxicating. And I have a belief these days that, a lot of marriages and relationships break up because we're bombarded with all these chemical synthetic aromas that interfere with the body's natural ability in its cycles and rhythms to release its pheromones. And so, there is science coming out behind that, but I've always felt that since I
yeah,
became an aromatherapist some
yeah.
35, 40 years ago. And so when I look at it as a business that I've had now for 18 years, when I bring out products or new oils, I do tend to bring them out in fours. And after Jacqueline, I had all those sessions with her. That never left me, the 4 seasons. And so then I wrote down, and it took me a year to come up with this, by the way, but I wrote down the 4 seasons. Then there was the 4 elements, the 4 corners of the earth. There's so many things that are done in fours. There's 4 weeks nearly in every month. Woman's cycle is 4 weeks. Like the moon is usually every 4 weeks or 28 days. And so I just started noticing that there is a lot more around cycles and rhythms than potentially, and I can speak for myself, ever gave enough credit to. And yet we know to plant by the moon or to do things in line with our cycle and when we're most creative or when we need to be still. Like even in a month, a woman goes through those 4 cycles that you're talking about. And so when I looked at the 4 seasons about what happens in each one of those seasons, well, I came up with, autumn to me, which is your rupture. When we're ruptured, we really want to feel the one thing we crave is to be grounded. And so to me, autumn was about becoming more grounded. So I called it Ground Me. And then winter, we move into what you called the retreat or the stillness. I called winter, the winter blend, Nurture Me. So allow me to be in the space, to nurture myself, to become still, to find who I come home to me again in the warmth of my own hug. And then spring, you called it the return. Well, to return is to know where we're returning to. And so I called my spring blend Inspire Me. Inspire me to call me back, to return to what I know at a bigger, better version of myself, to return to the sanctity of my inner knowing. That's why I'm inspired to do that through the element and the season of spring. And then summer, which you call the rise. Well, to rise with the greatest force on this earth is love. And so I called summer Love Me. And I just, when you told me your 4 seasons for this beautiful real life fairy tales podcast, I instantly could see how my 4 blends aligned with your 4 fairy tale stories. And I just felt so honored to share that with you, because I put a lot of time into the thinking
Yeah.
of what those seasons meant to me,
Yeah.
and then how I could pull myself through those moments, the
Mm.
seasons of life, with grace and, as I said, courage and strength and dignity and calm and wisdom.
I'll get a way for people to be able to find those from you, Kim, and put a link in with this podcast to make sure that people can find them. One of the things that I've thought about as you were talking is I see a lot of things in movies. It's one of my, I've got a movie for everything, for every archetype, all the personalities. But there's this gorgeous children's movie called Rise of the Guardians. Have you ever seen it?
No, no.
Oh, it's fabulous. And it's so the Guardians are Santa Claus and Jack Frost and the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny's Australian. He's very funny. But then there's
Of course, he's Australian.
he's Australian. So they've got this Santa Claus at the North Pole. They've got this big world globe that's covered in all these little lights, which is the children and their dreams. Their lights are on, and they notice that the lights are all starting to go out, and they realize that there is a shadow, there's a fear shadow that's visiting the children in their dreams and robbing them of their dreams and so on. And so the guardians have to, save the children. But this globe, all these lights suddenly go out, and like there's one light left, which is one child that still believes in the guardians. But the visual of that in love, the effects of love and the effects of fear, and that literal light that goes on when people are so full of love and have that love in overflow for everybody around them, is how I see you, Kim. You're a bright light, my love. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with us and for sharing your story. For women listening to these stories, it's easy to hear stories when there are a handful of people that tell their stories. But as somebody that's in this world, I know the level of vulnerability and the level of courage that it takes to be so open with your stories in the world today. And so it truly is a gift. And I really honor you, and I thank you for sharing your beautiful fairy tale with us.
Oh, well, I can tell you this. The fact that my daughter gets married this year, and the fact that my daughter is now working with me in my business, and my son has got a new career, and I've got a beautiful new son-in-law that I'm getting, and we are in a beautiful phase in our lives. I do believe in fairy tales. I do believe in happy endings. There's just often new beginnings as well, and opportunities to grow and learn and to discover more. And I just pray that, in my humble opinion, that anyone listening to this just knows that love is your superpower, that with love we can save the world, we can save ourselves, and that's why I write books on self-love, because if we can emotionally regulate and emotionally care for ourselves, then the capacity to give and support others when they're in the mosh pit of their life. It's interesting. If you're trying to have a baby, you see everyone out there having babies. If you're single, you see everyone getting married. If you're down in the dumps, everyone else seems to be happy. But the reminder is that life is full of ebb and flow, different seasons, different moments, and that you will find your summer and spring again. You will rise. And just remember, when you're rising, someone else will be in the mosh pit, the bathroom floor. And so the memory of that, when I'm in a good space like I am now, is I just have even more capacity and more love to give to those who need it. And I pray that when I next hit mine, one, I'm not there for too long, but that I get that same love returned. And so even our ups and downs in life are cyclical, and they come and they go. They never stay the same. And I just want to finish by saying, in all my workshops that I present, I'll say, her in the room is in a really challenging time right now. And I'll usually get, Edwina, at least a third, if not half the room will put their hand up. Either they themselves or someone really close to them is going through a really tough time. And I say, well, I've got 4 words that my beautiful Jacqueline taught me. This too shall pass. And then I'll say, and who in the room is in a really good place in their life right now? And of course, the rest of the room puts their hand up and I go, oh, so amazing. Thank you. I have another 4 words from you, from beautiful Jacqueline. This too shall pass. And so the reminder is that we're never arrogant and egotistical enough to know that when life's great, it'll stay that way. And we're never solemn and depressing enough to know that life will ever stay bad.
Yeah.
It just is. And the opportunity for you to approach it with a sense of love and curiosity is going to serve you potentially, may serve you way better than doing it with hate, resentment, shame, remorse. Of course, those feelings are valid, but you want to work through them as quickly as possible and take the lessons, take the learnings. And if you can, have, gratitude in your heart for them, like I do now. But it does take time to get there. I'm not being Pollyanna here and pretending it's all a box of chocolates. It's not. But through work like you do and what you offer gives us all the reminders that we need, that nothing stays the same and that we have the ability to rise above each and every time. And for that, I just want to say thank you to you, beautiful girl, because you are a magnet of possibility, of story, of love, of future, of possibility, of potentiality. Like you ooze that. So I'm the one who feels very honored and privileged to be here, and I thank you.
You're so generous, darling. Thank you so much. All right, beautiful souls. That is it from us for this episode, but we will be back. We will be back again. All right. So much love. And bye for now.